And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have one returning brother and one newcomer into the temple. They are part of the double-headed monster that is Odynski Gaming, previously on here for the original version of the primer for Indominant, now back with 2.0 in anticipation of their upcoming release on backer kit. In the red corner, we have Zarek Odynski, and in the blue corner we have Ricardo Rivera, aka Ricky, aka Ricky Bobby. How you two doing today? Or tonight?
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming back. So normally I would do the origin story part as the opening for this kind of thing, but since that was kind of already done with one of you,
yeah,
I have to put Ricky in the spotlight for this.
Nice.
This isn't me picking on you or singling you out. I hold these truths to be self-evident that all are cremated equal. But it's more that I do this with everybody their first time. So
yeah,
Ricky, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I can't thank you enough for having us back on, being able to meet you, and being able to talk on this. So, but yeah, 2020 hit, COVID hit, and I was at home a lot more. My wife and I just had our first baby, and I was looking for something to do as a hobby, and I started like picking up old things, and I was like, here's my magic cards. I could get back into that. What about D&D? I had like one old book. I think it was like a 4th edition book. And I looked at it and I was like, I got to hit up my old friends. And I kind of started going around and looking for folks that wanted to play D&D. And while COVID was still a thing, we figured it out, right? We met up when we were all good and all that. And then from there, I started branching out and looking for other groups online, like on Discord and things like that. And then my wife actually noticed that Zarek was asking for playtesters for Indominant back then. That was 2.5, 3 years ago at this point. And I reached out and started to play test that. And at that point, I had played D&D a whole bunch. I had been a DM for, I guess that'd be like 2 years to that point. And then played a bit of Pathfinder as well, and just really loved it. Started collecting dice, started collecting minis. I even got a 3D printer, and started printing out things as well. So it was just great, And so when Zarek, came around and said, "Hey, come on and play test," it was kind of like perfect timing, So I was at that point where I was just like really wanted to go in and play. And then from there, I kept on giving Zarek so much feedback on the game that he's like, "Hey, you wanna come on board? You wanna join, the team?" And I said, "Absolutely, yeah." So that's been an amazing ride since then. We've been doing tons and tons of testing of our own game and playing of it, but in the meantime, still playing, other D&D games and things like that. Looking at other solo plays, like even Shadow Dark, playing the solo version of it. Just different games like that and playing in. So yeah, it's been fun. Past couple of years, like really running in the whole community.
Mm-hmm. And learning that the dice gods are a model of true equality. It does not matter what your background is; the dice gods hate you.
Yeah, yeah. Can't tell you how many times I've bought a new set because I'm like, this D20.
Digital dice are the craziest for me.
Yeah.
I don't trust any dice, period. And certain people that I've worked with, I refuse to let them roll anyone's dice but their own. because I don't want them spreading their curse onto other people. Because
Right.
monks sometimes have to double as priests, depending on in a situation, kind of like someone in the position of a officer, but not really having the rank of an officer. And that does mean the joke has been passed around about having to bless people's dice.
I love that. That is so good. I think I have a 3D printed dice jail somewhere around here for the bad dice that don't give me what I want. And then yeah, when we go digital, it's weird. We just snap 20s all the time. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, especially when I'm the GM or comic editor in our case.
Yeah.
Always critting. I crit every single session when I run the game. At least once.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And the last time I did this with Zarek,
Yeah.
we had a bit of a back and forth regarding superhero RPGs. Ricardo, just out of curiosity, were you familiar with the idea of supers RPGs or messing around with supers in video games, for instance, before hopping on to Indominant?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, and sorry, Ricky. Yeah, you could call her Ricky. It's no worries. But yeah. Playing Batman, Arkham Asylum, all that. Being in like a big Marvel's fan, and like actually watching all the different Marvel superhero movies and all that. I picked up on it over the last, I don't know, 6-7 years of just watching what's going on in the industry of superheroes, and then playing actual game. I sat down with a couple of friends that played Mutants and Mastermind. That was one time a while ago, but I think the big thing was I really I get confused by like a lot of numbers, a lot of data, and a lot of things like that. And so, D&D for me was a little bit easier to grasp onto. Oddly enough, 5th edition was a little bit easier. Pathfinder was a wild ride. I think anybody listening can agree. Like Pathfinder's a lot more to it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, by the time I hopped on the team, it was then going in research mode and thinking about what are mechanics that are fun, are easy, that we can not reinvent the wheel, but rather just enjoy together. And so we really focused on that and thought about what makes really something fun as you create a superhero and you do superhero things, right, or heroic things, definitely. So all that to say, yeah, it was something that as I got on the team, we started really focusing on that, and researching more and having fun with it. So,
and I suppose this will probably be a bit obvious, but I do have to ask this just to get it out of the system.
yeah.
Do you guys consider yourself more Marvel guys or DC guys?
Oh man, I'm more of a DC guy. I love Batman. Yeah, that Batman versus Superman, like all the early comics of that. Like I'm a big DC guy.
That's funny. I think I would lean towards Marvel, but I've been just very into all superheroes for quite some time when I was young.
Yeah.
I've always been into superheroes and stuff like that. So yeah, lean more Marvel probably because Hulk was always my favorite superhero. But yeah, just great superheroes all around. Image Comics and a bunch of other lines are awesome as well.
Yeah. Personally, whenever somebody asks me that question, I would say, "Bitch, please, I pick Valiant," just to throw them off. And I like Valiant. I like Image. I'm someone who's going to be all over the place when it comes to which I prefer. I will admit that more urban supernatural end of things, I was a fan of growing up. Along with some interesting choices, but in that, and I still hold to this. Supers in RPGs have had an interesting history, and it's one where being a little bit crunchy is kind of inevitable, just because of all the different genres that a superhero universe has to encompass in some form. That's why there's a very thin line between Supers RPGs and Universalist ones.
Mm-hmm.
Champions is the big example. You know, that started as a Supers RPG and then morphed into a Universalist one with Hero System.
Right.
But even with that, you have the different eras, you have the different ages. If you were to nail down what sort of age, what sort of style of superhero Indominant is trying to shoot for, what would you say it is?
For like thematic, it's a lot more of the grounded type of superheroes.
Yeah.
You know, the unstoppable godlike superheroes for us, we just find if you're playing a superhero game, don't result in the best storytelling always, because it's kind of like the assumption is you're going to win. Obviously, if you know what you're fighting and what you're trying to stop is kind of on that same level, it does work, and there can be some drama and such, but you kind of can't raise the stakes past that point is the other thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so keeping the stakes a lot lower and more grounded just feels like you can have a lot more long-term storytelling and a lot more kind of personal investment, because things aren't they're not crazy. It doesn't always go to just like the universe is exploding and now there's 5,000 universes, and
So
Yeah.
to put
I was gonna.
to put it another way, obviously there's the superhero families thing in DC, but in Marvel you've had a more of a scaling or more of a level approach. You know, street level, city level, national level, and then going into the cosmic stuff. Using that model, where would you say Indominant leans into as far as what range?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit above the city level, because we're a little bit more gritty. It's very interesting because we can actually have groups that can range to be very comical and funny. We had a robot that absolutely loved donuts and sweets, right? And then we have somebody who loves to be an investigator and uses psionic energy to actually go into the minds and scare the heck out of people. And it's that kind of fun balance that you can have, but they're not so over empowering that it's like they can take over an entire city or something or go some crazy power level in that sense. But yeah, I think there's times where it can be very much like gritty. It could be filled with drama. It could be filled with exploring a backstory and whatnot. But you don't have to go. We don't go to that scale where it's a planet eating thing. It's more so how do you stop that parasite from taking over that local community or whatever it is, right? And we have that instead. We have a whole parasite a villain, in our game called the Thrall. So, but yeah, does that make sense? It's kind of at that scale.
So would you say it's national scale?
Yeah, I mean, it starts street level, obviously, and then probably the biggest that you could go is like national kind of level. Something that's a planetary threat isn't necessarily going to be like one, bad guy or one alien or something like that. And like destroying a whole city, that's up there with the higher level threats and kind of power scale in this universe.
Mm-hmm. And to go a little bit further into that, what would be some existing superhero groups, not individual superheroes, but groups or teams that would be a bit analogous to the tone that you guys are trying to go for with Indominant?
A good question. Yeah, I think we could, because we spend a lot of time thinking about making our own groups, right? What a big organization is the Galactic Legion United, and they're not powered. They're both humans and our alien species and things like that are working together to fight crime in the universe. And they would use or partner with supers to actually go out there to solve those big issues, right? Where there is a villain that would require more muscle, so to speak, on certain issues, right? Like if they're trying to take over a Mars colony or something, and it's super on super. Hey, we need more firepower, right? And they would call on that. So yeah. So as far as like a group, I mean, if you think about a bit of the Avengers on how they work with the organizations on there with Shield, it's kind of in that kind of way, right? Not all of our supers obviously are they're not gods, right? We've established that, but they definitely would work with organization that's at that level of Shield to go in, investigate, and solve big major issues, right? Especially regional wide, or even maybe whole planet wide, that they have to go to a planet and help them, right? So
yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, it is somewhat interesting. You guys have a D20 based background with with stuff like D&D 5e, since there's a few concepts that it seems you introduced into that sandbox, and one that I wanted to kind of get a feel for why this was introduced is the way dominance and weakness works, because it does feel analogous to advantage disadvantage, but having more opportunities to stack instead of just one.
Yeah.
It's really, this system was driven by Ricky. We used previously, and the last time we were on with you, we used to use advantage and disadvantage just like D&D. We did let it stack, so you could roll like 4 D20s and keep your highest. And we just wanted to try out a couple things. Ricky just thought like, hey, let's look at a different way of running advantage. And so we landed on, you add a die. It's always a single die to your D20 roll. The first stack starts at a D4, and then it'll go D6, D8, D10, D12, and then it jumps to D20. So you can get up to 6 stacks, and that goes in both directions. So positive being dominance and negative being weakness. And what you do is you add that second die, whatever it rolls, to the value of your D20 as if it's part of the same dice.
Right.
So, for example, if I've got 2 stacks of dominance, and I roll my D20 and my D6, and I get a 17 on my D20 and a 3 on my D6, it would be a natural 20 and would get a critical hit. Like if you're doing an attack, or you would critically succeed the check that you're doing. And so it does a lot of things actually, where it just feels really exciting because it increases your crit chance by a lot more.
Right.
And then because of the way it stacks, it actually creates a really strong sense of like teamwork, because in order to get a bunch of different stacks, you're going to need multiple supers to work together to build up those stacks, by applying negative effects to their enemies, flanking, stuff like that. And so you end up with a lot of teamwork. Go ahead, Ricky.
Yeah, no, I mean, explain it exactly. Like, we wanted to make sure that there is strategy in our game. It's really interesting to see, like, okay, this person is going to, stun this person, then this person's going to knock them down. Then the third person is a blaster, and our blasters happen to be the highest damage dealing people. So we want them to, go in there and try to attack with dominance and potentially crit, and then even deal 2 to 3, maybe 4 times the amount of damage, depending on how the dice tell the story, right? So, so we wanted something very heroic and epic, as well as being focused in teamwork, and that's why we moved away from just another advantage disadvantage kind of system. Just do something that I think could be very fun. And in our playtests, over the summer, it's been awesome. There's been tons of times where that one like really working strategically actually change the tide of a battle where maybe it might not have if they didn't work together, right? To add additional dominance stacked on. In the meanwhile, the threats can do the same thing. The threats are monsters in our game, but threats can go in there and apply additional weaknesses on them, on these supers, to make it harder for them. It's not just our threats and monsters are silly or don't know strategy. They are smart, and we give tools for the comic editor to think through. Hey, this group of bolters who are lightning kind of gang, right? Lightning based gang. They're gonna stun you. They're gonna try to lock you down so that way they can get away with money. So yeah, so it's using that on both sides of the fence, on for the comic editor to have fun, as well as supers to really have some epic moments.
Yeah. And speaking of the opposing side of things, that brings me to enemy creation. Because
Yeah.
in a lot of Supers RPGs, you have the notion of enemy creation working the same way as PC creation, and a lot of Universalist games do this. And while to a certain point it's understandable why, it ends up creating a flaw where the GM has to do a lot of work because they're essentially making the equivalent of PCs complexity-wise multiple times over, especially if they want to have some big fight like say the Chitauri invasion in the first Avengers.
Mm-hmm.
So with Indominant, do you have a separate creation system for people who want to create their own threats?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ricky.
Yeah, Zarek will, I think, definitely talk about the numbers. We've had many nights talking about the numbers and balancing of creating threats. At the same rate, when we what we want to do is provide as many threats as possible for a comic editor to have out of the box, out of our threat index book. Over 400 threats, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is we wanted to create a system that's very easy to balance on the battlefield, right? If you have two players and one comic editor, you have two supers on the field. And so do we want to make it a hard difficulty? Do we want to make it something that, it can scale up pretty quickly or scale down? That's what we aimed for. So we created a counterpoint system where every super would have a certain amount of encounter points. Usually starts at about 20. And depending on if they've got some cool upgrades, like costume upgrades in our system, that might increase a bit. But 2 players would be 40 then. And then on the other side for the comic editor, then they can know, okay, if I want to make this an even fight, right? Like it's fun, it's gritty, like I said earlier. Then they'll have on the threat side enough threats that equal out to 40 points. If they want it a little bit harder, they might add an extra threat or so. That actually comes out to 2 and 2 versus 2. But if it's a little harder, it's 2 versus 3 sometimes. Or we do the maybe 1 to many, right? And we have like 5 low-level threats. Versus these 2, and now you got to be more strategical. Now you only got 2 turns and a couple set of actions that you got to kind of figure out. Does it make sense to pursue and hunt down all of those threats, or does it make sense to use your resources for something else, right? So that's a big thing. We wanted to make sure it is balanced and easily able to balance. And on the threat index, you'll be able to see very quickly those different points and things like that to very quickly put a encounter together. And maybe Zarek, yeah, definitely talk about the numbers and how we, balanced out like the threat stat scaling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, without getting into like the very, detailed numbers behind the curtain, kind of, threats are scaled to be, like Ricky was saying, on par when they're the same level, but they're not just like creating a player character. They're going to have a lot less powers. They're going to have they always have a base power, is what we call it. It's like they're, just swing your weapon kind of thing in a sense. Then they'll have a few powers where some might be a single use that's really powerful. Some might be multi-use that's a lot less powerful, but it's still better than their base powers.
Mm-hmm.
And so the supers in our game, they use drive to fuel their powers. And so instead of having every threat use drive and have to have the comic editor track drive for, potentially 3, 4, 5 or more threats. They just have a per power use limit, and then they also have some other special actions that can kind of help even the odds. Or we've got elite threats and boss threats, which we call that their rank. And so they'll have extra AP, which is what can make them stronger, rather than giving them like 20 different powers, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because
so it's asymmetric in that way.
Yeah, on the comic editor side, it's so tough, right? You're managing 3 or 4 or 5, threats. That's a lot of powers to look at. So we wanted to just streamline that and have it where elites or bosses, they may have a good set of powers, but they also have ultimate actions, as well as epic actions that would take place either in between other players' turns or ultimate actions at the top of the round. And the group of supers would have a strategy to, if I can take out this, teleportation device, they won't have this ultimate action available anymore. If I can, lower this person's health enough, that would knock off this kind of missile launcher, right? So therefore, they can't do this particular epic action anymore. Those kind of things that would make sense to work as a team to bring down that kind of larger threat. And make it easier along the way. So,
yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, I will admit that the way you described that sounds a lot more manageable than the challenge rating thing, which has been my whipping boy for about 20 years. I wasn't a big fan of challenge rating back when it was introduced in 3rd edition D&D. I'm still not a fan of it. I feel like it creates too many assumptions.
Right.
It carries too many assumptions, let me say. Specifically, the assumption that you're working with a balanced party of 4. Which even if you are, that's not really something you should be assuming. Because from a design perspective, because you have no way of knowing how many people are going to be at that table.
Right.
And whether or not they're going to be balanced, which is usually shorthand for you only using the original 4 classes, which and once things like feats and multi-classing and racial abilities and prestiges and all that starts getting into the mix, you can't assume that as much as you could.
Right.
Like even if, say, in 5e you're just having a fighter, a rogue, a wizard, and a cleric, I could still contend with. Do you have any idea how little that narrows it down?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting. We've had a couple chats with just different playtesters, folks in our community, that what if you make a group of all fire-based heroes, right? Or what if you make a group of all ice-based supers? So the powers themselves, the mixing and matching with the powers and our archetypes are really what set up the pace for what's the role playing and the actual fighting style on the actual combat. So if you have 3 people that can all freeze, you can use that to your advantage to go out there and really try to target and bring down a threat, right? And it's really interesting because we don't have to, with the encounter point system, like you just said, we don't have to actually worry about that being a problem because those threats are still balanced against three supers. So it ends up still being a good fight, right? Not something that's just super, locked down or anything like that. It's something that they are still going to have a fun challenge. And if they roll again and they try to do another all cast of the same super, at least then they have the same kind of origin or same kind of unique path together. And I think that's really fun, right? That's the role play aspect of it. That why did you all become super empowered in the first place? You have the same origin story, but you use it differently. And your archetype can change with talents every other level to change the way you even use those powers, because every talent set can be totally different from another talent set. So it's really exciting.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, the encounter point system, the way we set it up is as little assumptions as possible. It actually makes 0 assumptions. So that's the goal with it, is you you always base it off of what your group is, and you don't have to think about, oh well, they chose a ice blaster, so I know that's a really powerful combo, and or I have 3 players and the system's designed to scale to 4 players. What do I do? How do I make it balanced?
Right.
A lot of people say like the challenge rating system, you have to learn by trying, like it's trial by fire. We tried to reduce that as much as possible. Obviously, you're going to have to learn like what certain threats working together might be able to accomplish. But in general, it's meant to be a lot easier to pick up and use without having a scenario where one group, that same fight is a cakewalk, and then the other it's super difficult because they don't have the right combinations, or they chose maybe like weaker builds, or if you will, for their characters.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what I find funny about the whole thing is that sort of encounter budget, I guess as I'll call it, isn't too far removed from what D&D 4th edition was trying to do, which I've nicknamed the edition I'm supposed to hate, but I don't because the check bounced. And
it's so funny you say that. Apparently, I would love 4th edition. I haven't gotten to play it, but a lot of things that I like design-wise, and like MCDM RPG, or Draw Steel as it's called now, like they use a ton of 4th edition stuff, and I'm just like, that sounds so awesome. What a great idea. And I've never had the chance
I've
to play
read
it,
through some of the stuff that Draw Steel is doing. That's very much the case of that. That's very much the case there. I've also seen what stuff like 13th Age, which is directly succeeding some of that, is doing. Especially since both were done by Heinso and Tweet, but when they're not arguing with each other about various things. But that's a whole other matter. I like giving people shit because of the years where if you even mentioned that you enjoyed 4th edition, it would cause so many people to get on the fainting couch or start clutching the pearls. And I am very, very petty. But and I do see what Greg had put in the chat about Indominant based on individual encounter balancing and not daily resource balancing. I'm gonna be honest. Every edition of D&D is balanced around the entire table kissing the ass of the casters. And if that's some may go, isn't that a little harsh? Not really, when the mere idea of giving martial characters something to do makes the casters re. And I've seen them re on multiple occasions over the years. This is not a 5th edition problem. This has been a problem for decades. So, yeah, I'm going to take the piss out of them. Plus, as I said, all are cremated equal. But since we're getting into that, previously there was when I had you on in the past, there was the discussion about the archetypes and powers relationship.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm curious about is, from the 1.0 primer to the 2.0, were there any that were significantly overhauled, any that got folded into other setups or anything like that, or is it largely the same?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, we what we did is take a look at the talents, especially for the Arbiter, and we found their level 2 talent set were almost all identical, and we looked at each other and were like, how did that happen? So a fire manipulator arbiter versus a psionic arbiter had the same first and second choice. It was the same wording and so on, right? And so we completely revamped that talent set. But when you look, if you pull back then and look at all the archetypes, they've stayed the same. Aside from these kind of tweaks of, oh, okay, let's make sure that this is unique, right? Especially our arbiter, they are technically our best healers. in the game because of they come with a heal ability right at level 1. So that's something that we just wanted to make sure, like by the time you get to level 2, you have a good talent to really completely change around how you heal with your power set. So yeah.
And since there's the whole thing about resource consumption balancing, I think I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that not balancing around that. And thank you, Living Mimic, for the follow. Hope you enjoy the madness. is the fact that balancing around limited resources in some cases can create a problem that we in the temple call the rainy day paradox, or H.C. Bailey, a let's player that I watched, calls too good to use. The general idea is I can't use this one thing right now. What if I need it for later? Or I can't use one of my 99 mega elixirs. What if I need it for a later fight? He says at the final boss of the story.
Right.
Which sounds ridiculous, but when you give people a limited resource, there is a temptation to be very, very conservative with it, almost hermit crab level of conservative with it.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of the thing, right? Is if all the fights are sort of based around you using your resources until you have like that big fight where it's hard because your resources are limited, then yeah, it kind of creates the like saving it for a rainy day, like you said, the rainy day paradox. We do have resources and they do go away and you can use them. We do have ways though for you to not just run out. So every archetype has their own way to recover drive. Drive is the power resource that we have. Every super has drive. The amount you have is based on your level. And every archetype has a way to recover some drive while they're fighting. The exception, with like a little asterisk, is the Arbiter. Like Ricky had mentioned, they're really good at healing. That's part of what also makes the encounters kind of less reliant on having all your resources or building characters a specific way. Is you can have an Arbiter and they'll be able to heal you, but they're going to be limited in their drive. They can reduce how much they use every round, but they can't recover drive during combat. However, they can recover a lot more drive between fights by taking a break. It's like a short rest from, any fantasy game really, like Pathfinder or D&D. It's just a lot quicker and shorter because it's a superhero system and setting. And so they'll recover a bunch of drive when they take a break versus everybody else will actually recover quite a bit during combat. And so even if you're out, it doesn't mean you're useless anymore. You're going to have to play to your strengths that your archetype kind of makes you good at. And that will let you recover drive so you can continue fighting. You just won't be able to like go guns blazing, use all my best powers forever. You do have to manage your resources, but like I said, if you run out, it's not like you're done and you're useless.
And there's thematics behind it too, right? So drive itself, what we wanted to really accomplish is if you play by your archetype, you'll be rewarded with equal amounts of drive. So somebody who's like a guardian, they're going to go in and they're going to try and take some hits. And as a result, things are not going to hit them, right? And as a result of things not hitting them, they actually end up gaining and recovering drive. So they can continue to even go out and buff allies. And when they buff allies, hey, they get to gain their drive back. So just an example, right? But the more that you play that archetype, the more you get back that. And all the meanwhile, if the guardian is, let's say, a different term here, tanking, right? They're up front and they're taking the hits. The blaster is in the back dealing some damage, and wouldn't you know it, by round 2 or 3, they've actually gained enough drive to deal to use one of their most powerful powers, right? Their tier 5, tier 6, whatever it is. because they've actually slowly been growing their drive while everybody else has been kind of taking the hits or strategically placing things, right? So again, that's how it kind of works together. That it is more strategic based in how you go about the combat, and then because of that, your drive is going to be rewarded back to you.
Yeah. And something that I find a bit interesting is it's been a while since the 1.0 version of the primer, but from what I recall originally, you had, even though you had the mixture of powers and talents, talents were exclusively tied to just the archetype. But now with this, you have talents tied to both archetype and power set, which I do find interesting.
Yeah, we've actually had that be the way it worked all the time, but we've just made some updates to some of the talents. Really, the reason we want it that way, another person who actually was going through a bunch of our game and kind of finding some OP combinations and stuff,
Yeah.
had pointed out that there is a lot of customization that you can do. A ice arbiter is going to be very different from a fire arbiter, and it's not just because they have fire powers and ice powers, it's because they also have different talents that they can select. And so just being an arbiter doesn't mean that every arbiter gets the same talents. They're going to get the same like types of talents at the same tiers, but they're going to all be unique and different. Like Ricky said, like with arbiter, we actually used to have a problem where they all were kind of samey, and arbiter's first 2-tier talents, they were very similar. It was just like let you heal with your powers, and so instead we've changed it to add a specific way that your powers can start healing. So for example, I think we call it air conditioning or air conditioner for ice. It's a very fun name. We try to have a lot of fun with our namings.
Yeah.
That makes it so that when you use a targeted ranged attack on an enemy, you create like a line of healing in between the target and yourself. And so that lets you play offensively while still healing. And then the other option is going to let you pretty much, you gain a new power, and you get to choose how much drive you spend on it to do a certain amount of healing, things like that. So, and then fire is going to be very different. Like fire makes explosions around their target that heals allies, and their other heal power is like a targeted heal versus I think the ice is like a targeted shield power or something like that. But
yeah, and I think something fun too that I've really emphasized with talents and is you can actually try to change them in between major mission arcs or missions overall, right? If you think about I don't know, Green Arrow, right? Does he bring the exact same arrows to every single encounter, or does he study his opponent? He studies the mission ahead of him and will bring specialized actual arrows or whatnot to actually make sure that he's set to go out there and encounter whatever it is, right? Encounter whatever villain. So in many ways, the talents are like that. We also do that with powers too, like the specific capital P powers that, hey, I selected a main action ability here, a minor action here, but I notice I don't have any reactions, right, in case somebody hits me or something. Well, cool. You know what? I'm going to, between getting ready for the next major mission or the next thing that I'm going to travel to, I'm going to thematically say I did load my quiver with a little bit more tricks, right? And all that means to your comic editors, okay, I swapped some powers out, and I also tweaked a talent because I noticed I could do more damage here, or maybe I should be more defensive. Or maybe I want to have a little bit more supportive. If I'm an arbiter that went all in on offense, but I don't have anything to bolster up my supporting, maybe I should choose a talent that's more supporting here, and then balance out a power selection as well. So all that to say, just the customization there definitely helps out between encounters and so on.
And it definitely leans into one of the one of the materials we talked about last time, that being City of Heroes, and how it had its relationship between role and power set, where you could have two characters who are using the same power set but different roles, and they're not using them the same way, 100%.
Right.
And
Yeah, exactly.
and vice versa. Which I do think is important because, well, there's plenty of characters who in superheroes who have some sort of elemental mastery, but not all of them are going to be working on the same wavelength with it.
Mm-hmm.
And in keeping with that, there is one type of archetype that I see a lot in Super's games that wasn't present in the primer, and it might be for the best that it isn't, just for the headaches it causes, and that is magic. If somebody wanted to do a Doctor Strange or Constantine or the like, because that's always been a power that's been a headache to deal with in a lot of Super's games.
Yeah, when it's just like I can do a bunch of different things because I use magic, and so I've kind of got an answer for every situation. That's kind of more. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, a lot in Mutants and Masterminds and Hero System, and like, the idea is that magic can be. You can spend points on magic to replicate the effects of other powers, but the result of it is that magic has a bunch of exceptions written in, so it's less like an individual power and more like a Joker card that has to be controlled in a way so it doesn't completely snowball.
Right. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think a big thing for us is we have different origins,
Mm-hmm.
and they've been present for a long time with origins, maybe since character creation. But you could have the origin of magic, and mechanically, it gives you a nice bonus. I believe it's our plus a damage modifier, so you do a little bit more damage, right? But thematically, you can say, well, hey, the way that I hurl this literal fireball is a fireball. But somebody else who chooses perhaps one of our robotic species, or enigoids or anything like that, they can say, well, as a robot, I actually have a giant, gun that shoots out this fire, right? But the way that gun works is that it's actually building out all this magic within it and sourcing it out and so on. So it's kind of the balance of thematics as well as the actual role play of it, to make sure that, hey, I'm playing the person, the super that I want. I have the story and origin there and how it all works out as well. But the balance with your other players and so on is not just equal, but it's more so that you can work well with others, right? And not say, oh, well, hey, my magic can bend reality or whatnot, but rather I have the mechanical balance to actually be, on the battlefield, dealing a bit more damage and using my powers in a fun, unique way. So, yeah, I do love that about our game, that you can. We had somebody actually play as Sailor Moon, and they loved it, right? It was like kind of like the way their powers came about and so on, and you could do that because you have that origin available. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. I am a bit curious if has anyone tried to do their own version of like Iron Man or War Machine, just the power armor approach, and how did they handle it?
Yeah, so actually, funny enough, it was one of the first characters someone ever played in Indominant, like the first play test that we did back in, I think it was 2020. Yeah. And so somebody made like I think their character was a little bit themed more like Optimus Prime, but the idea being that they were a lot like Iron Man. And so what they used was Earth powers, was their specific power set. And they used the technology origin, kind of like what Ricky was saying, where instead of like hurling a magical fireball or like creating rocks out of like a magic portal or something, they would just shoot rocks, and what they did was theme them as like missiles and things like that, like Iron Man, or kind of more like War Machine, I guess, if we were to be a little bit more specific.
When you
like
describe rocks as missiles, I
bullets,
immediately
things like
think of Cyclops' concussive lasers.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
should theme powers like that as well. There's always the freedom to reflavor powers that are currently in the game, but pretty much anything is possible. You have to be a little bit. You have to see kind of the writing in between the lines that you can re-theme or reflavor a power. Like somebody wanted to create a Spider-Man sort of character, and they were saying that they were going to use the super strength power set, and it's got a lot of like grabs and ways to kind of disable their enemies, and so they flavored that disabling as like webbing somebody up. It wasn't that the power says, oh, you shoot webs at somebody, but it was you grab somebody and kind of like pin them down, and so they would thematically theme that as shooting webs and pinning that person down that way.
Yeah, I remember one of the players in a Common Rider campaign that I was doing really wanted to lean into Lucha Libre, but the rule set didn't exactly support it. So I had to write several pages worth of rules to try and make it work, and even then I wasn't satisfied.
Gotcha.
Would it be, if somebody wanted to lean into that with the idea of doing a lot of acrobatics that you would see a luchador using, would that be relatively easy to accomplish within Indominant?
Yeah, I think so. We have an entire power set called Martial Arts and High Mastery, so you could actually definitely use all the martial arts powers on there and reflavor even some of the key powers to be some kind of big move or whatnot, right? Our game leans heavily in the thematics, right? Gives the emphasis on the customization to the player. And with the comic editor, they can go in and kind of play it out together and understand how would that work, right?
Yeah.
We've also had requests for like a custom archetype, right? Or a custom power set. And what ends up happening is it's something that already exists within one of the 5 archetypes that we have, or the power set itself is very fine-tooth specific, like necromancy, for instance. Right? We want to go that route. We definitely want to find some way that can work in the system as a power set. But essentially, a lot of the things that end up like wanting to be able to create, you can really capture that within the combination of the current archetypes and current powers. And definitely we have big plans for expansions, looking at dark energy and things like that as a power set, and even controlling again like animals, or even transforming into animals and things like that. We want to get there. Those will definitely be expansions, and with a reason, right? A story, a background, a reason for that could actually happen. So all those kind of things to say, like, you can do a lot with it, and there's more to come for sure.
Yeah, and something else I couldn't help but notice, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but each of the power sets seems to have a tertiary resource or tertiary mechanic that is tied to the whole inherent effect. So there's actually 3 resources that players are going to have: their health, their drive, and whatever resource is tied to inherent effect.
Yeah, so not every inherent effect has a resource, but some definitely do. Like martial arts, you have ki that you can spend. Surging light, for the light energy power set, you'll build up stacks that you can spend. Gadgetry has idea points that they can use to add like extra targets or increase the range, add special effects to their powers, or some of the gadgetry powers can even just directly be enhanced with idea points. And so some are going to be more complex than others, is kind of what I mean. So gadgetry being like the prime example, that is probably the most complex power set and is going to require the most tracking, but it's opt in a sense. If I want to play a gadgeteer, generally that's pretty complex thematically, anyways.
Right.
But then we've got something like fire manipulation, where anytime they deal damage, they apply burn to the target, and they're gonna just take damage every turn for a few turns. And so there's a lot less tracking there, especially because they can just continue to reapply it, so you're not always tracking the duration very much. Things like that.
Yeah.
Electricity manipulation has like no tracking. It's just whenever you deal damage, it's gonna jump chain lightning to a few other targets.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I can certainly get that. I suppose in that regard, there one thing that I'm curious about, if you guys are if this is something you guys are planning on doing during the backer kit campaign, is how someone might be able to take the setup that you have with Indominant and do something akin to various characters. Just to throw one out there, because he was always one of my favorites with the X-Men. How someone might do Gambit within your system, for instance.
I think
Yeah.
really with something like Gambit, there's quite a few ways.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, I could think of. I mean, Earth is one that you could. And you could reflavor gadgetry to a degree, but a lot of the powers don't really fit that so much. You could maybe theme fire that way, but we do have a energy manipulation potentially that we'll do down the line that would be more like
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
kinetic energy manipulation, or like you mentioned, Cyclops' concussive blasts, things like that. So you have to do some reflavoring and theming, and sometimes it might need to be a little bit of a stretch. But for the most part, you can create a ton of different ideas. And really, it's just that we want to be able to make more content. And the way we design the game is so that it can be approachable. You don't always have to fully customize your theme. You can say, oh, I'm a big, strong dude who uses fire.
Yeah.
So it's like I don't have to fully create my own superhero from the ground up, in the sense of I have
Right.
to think of every specific little power he can do. We offload some of that and let you customize your character through the origin, the archetype, and then the power sets, which also give you the talents.
Yeah, and maybe I'm not maybe I'm misreading, but it also seems to me that there's a dividing line between powers and talents, and the fact that powers are things that are active, whereas talents allow you to do additional things with your choice of powers.
Yeah. It's a passive kind of thing, right? You make the choice, and a lot of the things are more passive, either in a bonus or that it tweaks the way that something works. We could go back to Arbiter definitely and talk about them, right? But yeah, it's essentially that ability to select something that would improve your play style, definitely. And then if you need to go back on it, right, that's where you can actually say, you know what, I liked this power that really did a lot of damage this last time. You know what? Let me look at my talents and see can I tweak this to deal more damage, or in some ways help out in making something maybe penetrating, or make something do something more to it, right? So yeah, that's the tweakability, right? The customization of it that talents comes in and as a play. And we have, gosh, quick math now. I'm putting myself on the spot, but every tier has 3 talents, and we have 10 talents of tiers, so 30, right? And then you do the 30 times the number of powers, which is 10, and then the number of archetypes of 5. So it's a lot of talents once we get to a level 20 book for our backer kit. But in just the primer, you have essentially 6 talents to choose from between tier 1 and tier 2.
Yeah, it's funny that it was mentioned earlier that you guys would have liked fourth edition, because I see a lot of fourth edition's DNA in this.
Yeah.
And this is coming from somebody who played a lot of fourth edition from day one all the way through the unfortunate Essentials era. Which kind of Essentials was kind of the canary in the coal mine, if I'm being honest. But that's another story. But with that in mind, what would you guys be shooting for as far as the launch window for the backer kit?
We're kind of playing it by ear. We just recently, after getting the 2.0 primer updated, have started working on, being more active on social media and on our YouTube channel, and doing stuff like this. And then we're going to be marketing as well once the primer is out, available for purchase for the physical copy. So we really want to push for like a February backer kit launch, but like I said, we're just kind of playing it by ear. You need to kind of hit the ground running on crowdfunding platforms to really do well. So we're trying to do the best of not waiting too long, mixed with doing the best we can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and we want to build our community, have a strong community. We have some amazing members in our community already, very vocal, and some already on this as well, leaving comments, which is just so great to see,
Yeah.
But it just continue to grow that and get to a point where we're not the comic editor anymore, right? That other people are running the games, and we have a couple of folks that have already said, "Hey, I want to run the game at home with my group," and it's been amazing to see that. So that's the big goal. I think the backer kit coming on board, it helps us a lot with like the artwork and kind of the design of those big core rule books. And the fun thing is that we've got them written down, like all the stuff we want for our players book, which is our Supers Information Codex. It's all there written out, 1 to 20, levels 1 through 20. And so that in our threat index, we have all the monsters the threats that we want to see in our book. And then the comic editor book, it continues to expand, and Zarek is trying to control me on how much we put into that beast of a toolbox, right? For you to be able to really make sure you can have a strong comic editor book, right? It is our game master book, so we really want to do it well, but we also want to be organized with it as well. So all that content exists, it's there. The backer kit really happens when we feel like we've grown enough our community, and we can just kind of kick off and roll with it as fast as possible. So
yeah, I can certainly get that, and and given the 3 books that you guys have planned, it'll certainly make things interesting. But
yeah,
with all of that said, I do want to sincerely thank all of you for taking the time out of your schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness, and a thanks to everyone who left their various comments in this, even if one of them was trying to encourage me to pick on you, which you didn't need to encourage me to do that. I was going to do that anyways. And I hope some of the people here stick around in this temple, because there's always something interesting happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the time and just being willing to have us on board. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we can get you in a game soon, and anyone else that we want to run it with. So exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're very happy to be back again. Thank you for having me again. Okay.
And of course, a sincere thanks to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
「